Sigwe Ganyadilitu Nyangets. Hi, I'm Lyzee Ninham, and I did my paper for the Indigenous object on corn, and I want to discuss corn spirits and corn hustals today. Um, so I'll be discussing what I learned along the way. With corn planting, harvesting, and food systems, I learned a lot about this during my um, oral interviews with many people across the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, and also through a couple academic papers. For corn planting, it's well known that we plant them with their two other sisters, and the stories along with that. I go into it a lot during my paper, but corn is planted first on a mound, and then squash is planted around it, and beans are planted to climb up the corn stalk. And basically, they're self-sustaining polycultures is what they're called in the one paper, and that's where they support each other. But what's actually really interesting is beyond the fact that they support each other through the planting process, they're actually harvested backwards of how they're planted, and they support each other in the way where they're consumed and the nutrition they get when they're planted in the polyculture. So that's really interesting because it actually, like, it there's more nutrients available in each piece of food that is consumed, and this actually goes to show how it supported the big nations throughout the Confederacy, and it's really interesting just how it's planted. But for harvesting corn, it's actually really interesting because there's green corn ceremony where it's harvested before it's actually done, because it's done and ready to harvest as it traditionally is and kept through the winter just before winter starts, like end of October, where it's like dry and you can store it longer. But otherwise, if you're doing it for green corn, where it's soft and you can use it in soups and stuff, uh, Michelle Hill goes into this a lot and explains how that soft corn is used for soups and it's used for mush, and it's just really interesting how it's used in ceremonies as well. I named this one Corn Hustals and Corn Spirits, kind of like the title of this presentation. I found a video on how to make a corn hustal on the internet, and it was someone that Scott Haudenosaunee had mentioned during a lecture. I've actually made a corn hustal before, so it's really interesting because this lady uses, she's actually, her name is at the bottom of the slide because she's the one I got the image from, but she actually uses only corn, whereas I had an outfit, and it kind of goes into what Scott Haudenosaunee had said about them being more decorative now. And I actually don't play with mine. I leave it on the mantle, and it's just really interesting because she makes them how they're traditionally supposed to be made. And then mine has like these really fancy, mine has a fancier ribbon dress than I have for sure. And just the corn hustle, I got a story from Sam Dockstader, who's been traveling North America for the Pallades presentation and stuff. She goes into like how Pallades are tell you when to harvest corn and stuff too. But she was really essential in learning a different version of the story and how the face of corn hustle actually disappeared. Whereas Michelle Hill also gave me another story to look into on my personal time, about how corn originally came to be, because I actually don't know the story, but there was one where there was a corn spirit and corn didn't exist, and then she asked someone to drag her across the like land, and she started to like drop kernels, and so that's how corn came to be. But it's also in our creation story where it came to be through Sky Woman, so it's just interesting to know the origin stories of all these things. I already mentioned mush, but there's different ways to make it, and there's different ceremonies that are a part of it. Some people who are in some groups use mush as a way to feed certain beings, but they're also used to feed like groups in different ceremonies. It's used like you grind up the corn and then you make it into mush that way. You can use green corn, I'm pretty sure, and there's one way to do that. Um, there's a lot of different uses for corn. Like I was talking with my friend Denise, who's a healer, and she got taught by Elva and Jameson in some way or another. And the way that corn is used is if they keep the silk. You use everything when you're Haudenosaunee. You use everything from everything that you have. And you use the silk and you make a tea out of it. And it actually helps with kidney health. And then the mother corn is also, when you make corn, you use water. And the water from that is used to feed babies. And it's used as formula. And then another use that was mentioned by Sam Dockstader and Michelle Hill was actually you would you would braid um, the husks, and it's if you don't use it for corn husk dolls, obviously, but you would braid the husks, and the rough part would be face up or face down, depending on what you're using it for. Like if you're using it for a mat, it's to wipe away negative energy from people who are coming into your home. Like they would wipe their shoes, and that would get rid of the energy that's on them. But we would also use them as mattresses when we were in Longhouse, and you would have the rough part down for that, but the rough part would be up if you're using it for wiping your shoes. And it's just interesting to know all the uses too, and I loved hearing about it. I loved interviewing people and learning all these different ways, and it made me so interested in the subject where I'm actually gonna talk to Sam Dockstader after, and we scheduled a time to talk about stuff like this. And it's just so interesting to learn that corn is used in such ways. And the amount of time it takes to braid the corn to make those mats is actually a long time, to where Sam said people have actually stopped making the stuff and just given up. But that just shows the amount of patience that we lack nowadays and how life has changed within the people in the Confederacy. Another big thing that has been stressed through not just the modernity I just mentioned, but the stuff that Scott Haudenosaunee has brought forward, Sam Dockstader has brought forward, modernity is pushing us away from our culture. And corn is like, Candace Miracle goes into this in the CBC article as well. But a lot of people have been pushed away from our culture, and that's through the government stuff. And corn is a way that we're looking at it being brought back, and it's a tool of revitalization. And I kind of go into this in my paper, but I kind of stay away from it. But a lot of people are going to these events, learning about white corn. We're making corn soup more. We're all learning these things, and it's just the new age of it. But at the same time, corn can't be the only thing that we use. But to grow corn, it's very interesting because Candace goes Candace goes into this. She goes into the fact that they're having these group activities, and they're all going out as a group and picking this corn at the harvesting time. They're all going and having these ceremonies. And the interesting thing about corn is that it takes a lot of patience to wait for it to be ready, because it actually takes a year for it to be ready once it's dried out. And something that Sam stresses and a lot of stuff when you talk to her or when you're at her presentation is she talks about the seed keepers. And she told me there's only about 75 or 78 left across the Confederacy. So that's like there's probably a couple thousand or up to a million of us left. And there's only 70 something seed keepers left that are guarding all these seeds. We have a bunch of different plants that we never see anymore, practically extinct, and only the seed keepers have the seeds. They have like auctions in the spring, or they have like sales in the spring, but nobody really knows about them anymore. And that's like a way that you can get seeds for corn. And I think that it's really interesting that we have our own society of people who guard these traditions and wait for us to be ready. And it's not going to last forever. I mean, numbers have probably dropped a lot. And I talked to her about the seed keepers, and I was really like fascinated by this. And I just kept asking her questions, and she was talking about the seed keepers, and It's just they have a lot of seeds, and they don't always work out when you plant them. And corn will not survive on its own without its sisters because they're sister spirits. And when you separate sisters, they become weaker. And the polyculture that was mentioned earlier, it just binds them together. And I don't really go into it, but like the way that we process food in the Haudenosaunee culture is a lot of us do the process of next adding calcium to the corn through ashes. And there's a word for it. It's really hard to pronounce. I go into it in the paper as well, but I don't mention it too much because it's a process that is so well known. And that's something that we use to make corn soup. But I was talking to my friend Denise as well, and an interview I did with her, and she said when you freeze it, it actually, once you do that process, it doesn't freeze well. So it's harder to keep once you prepare it, and it takes so long to prepare it that a lot of people aren't putting that step forward anymore. And that's the issue with modernity that I was talking about. Overall, this paper was actually really fun for me to do research for. I had a problem with making sure I had enough written sources, and I know that's probably a problem that not a lot of people in our class had or faced. And I was really grateful that that was a problem I had. Because I actually did get to look at a academic article that was really interesting to me, and it went into the science of like the three sisters, and it was just really interesting to absorb all this information. I know I've used the word interesting a lot during this because I'm actually genuinely fascinated by corn now, and specifically white corn, and I know I have some at home, and now I'm like thinking I should go out and try and plant some at some point. And it's really interesting because we also discussed in class after this paper was due a lot of how white corn is and how it operates and how it's so close with the Haudenosaunee culture. And I just really appreciated this paper and how fun it was to put together and how many interviews I got to do and how much I got to like see how much the people around me know and learn from them because I don't get that opportunity very often, and I'm really grateful for that. Of course, I couldn't move on without including my references. They're the same ones from my paper, but I have to include them. And thank you for sitting through this video and presentation. Uh, See you next semester. If not, I'll see you around.